Okay. Uh, Hi. So what I kind of wanted to go through um, real quick is um, is accessing um, the same set of data across multiple activities without having to pass through intent. So what I have here is just a basic activity. I already have it kind of all built. And if we watch it run, it's a simple screen. It has a spinner with a group of items, a button that says switch lists, which if I click it, it changes my item set, right? So it's just going to rotate through a group of objects each time. It's just updating that spinner itself, the new items that are listed in there. So if we look at the code, what you see is I have 3 string arrays, 1, 2, and 3, with my objects just kind of hard coded in there. Okay, so I've got an on click that's listening to the switch spinner that then changes my value and increments my value, and then that passes into this method, which then based on that integer value, it then updates my spinner adapter with 1, 2, and 3. Those are the list items, or the arrays that get put into the adapter, and then that adapter gets set to my spinner widget. Okay, so now this logic is great. It works. It's simple, but you're defined to one activity. Now, there are very few apps that use one activity unless we're incorporating fragments and other widgets that you really haven't gotten into yet in this course. So for a one-screen activity, this is fine. But let's say you have, this list, has, it's like, instead of objects 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, let's say it's, a group of things that you may want to access from different activities. So, like an app that, say, you're choosing, it's a quiz app, something like that. So, this list is, if we said list number 1, instead of list number 1, it's list of answers, right? Just for argument's sake, we're going to call it list answers. Other answers and list questions. I don't know, something like that. It's real simple. So if you're hard coding your data like this, where you have this subset of data that you want to be able to access across multiple activities, multiple screens, doing it like this is not efficient, because then you have to pass all this data through intent. You have to then pull it and apply it and do all those sorts of things, and you're double coding everything that you have, because every time that you want to go to an activity, you have to pass that data through intent every single time. And if you miss it once, then your new activity doesn't have that data. But there is an easier way. It's kind of it's something that I've been using in a lot of my apps lately, is taking this data, so this essentially string array data, and separating it out into its own class, and then calling that class from whatever activity I want. Now, doing that makes it a lot easier to modify the data, add new items, remove items from the list. Whatever you need to do, separating it out into its own class is one of the most efficient ways to code well. It's one of the things that took me, actually another mentor teaching me, is separating out your logic, taking what you have, and instead of building it all into one, separate the logic out, put it into subclasses, put it into other spaces, so that all of you're not so data heavy in one activity that it bogs down and you get slow. So by separating it out into a class, you can take some of that processing, if there is any, and it's off on its own, doing its own thing, only when you call it, not while the main activity is running. Make sense? Okay. So let's keep going. So I have my arrays. Now ignore the names. I'm not going to go through and fill those in, but just know that, you know, you could have, these could be any sort of thing. They could, now I have them as strings. You could have them as integers. You could do, you know, whatever value you want. Boolean, who cares? The concept is going to be the same, whether it's integer, Boolean, string, they're going to be the same. I'm just using string because it's visually easier to see. Okay, so first thing we want to do, and I know I got a bunch of reds just because I changed those names. So let's create a new class, and we're going to call it list items. Simple enough. Okay, it's a public class, which is what I want it to be. And what we're going to do is we're just going to rip this right out of the main activity, and we're going to throw it into list items. Okay, so now I've separated out the string arrays into their own class. Now, how do you get it? How do you take this data from one activity and dump it into another? Well, you want to create a public brackets string get list one. Okay, so I created a method. This method is named getList1, and it returns a string array. So as you can imagine, I need to find my return value. So let's do return list answers. Super simple. I've coded it here, and I'm just getting that value with this public method. Okay. So now I want to do getList2. You know, as you saw, Android Studio is smart enough to know, oh, hey, you've done this a couple times. Let me give you the most obvious one. So I know list one is answers, other answers. So I need to get my get list of questions, but just so that I keep my naming parameters the same, I'm changing that method name. So get list one, get list two, get list three. Because for my instance, it doesn't matter that they're answers questions because I'm putting it into a spinner. But for your case, the more well-defined your class name is, the easier it is going to be to develop further. Now, what I did is I put these objects just in there. I defined them that way. What you can do, and what I tended to do, was I would build the string array or the list. I tend to use array lists because I build my array lists off of, you know, objects, which you'll get into in a little bit. But so I take this and I build the logic in here before my return statement. So I, you know, add new objects to my array list and then return the final result in this class. Okay, so I have my list items done. Okay, so I have my getters, which are my returns for my strings. Okay, so now how do you code that in the main activity? So that one is easier said, or easier done than you would probably imagine. So it's very much just like what we did before. The key is this data is now accessible across any number of activities. So in my setup spinner class, which is called from my onCreate, so it's the first thing that's done, is my spinner is set up for the first time. So I'm just going to create a temporary string array object, list input equals get list one. Okay, now it highlights it as red, and it says, hey, what do you want? What is this? Now, if if you hit your red light bulb, it says, I don't know what to do with that. So I'm going to make it easy for it. And I'm going to say list items dot get list one. Forgot something. I need, make this static. My bad. I knew I forgot something. And then that's just a requirement by Android Studio that you can't access static from non-static activities, and you'll get into a lot of that as you get further into developing. But just know that I had to create my list as a static object so that I could pull it in through the direct. So I had my list input there. And essentially what you're going to do is you're going to do the same thing here. So in my switch lists, we'll just for ease, I'm going to there's a lot that you could do here. You could programmatically define should have done that while I was there. So in static as well. Call this static. Oops. Okay. So get list 2. And just for ease, we're going to copy, paste, and we'll call this 3 and 1. Here we go. Okay, so I've just built a logic in a way that my spinners, and since I noticed I missed this one, I'm setting my adapter. I need to dump this in my switch glass so that it keeps my appearance the same. So let's run this back onto the emulator. Now you're not going to see any visual change to it because I didn't change the UI. All I did, I had to finish my coffee before it got too cold, was switch the logic in the background. The UI is the same, the logic is what changed. So I have my list of objects, I switch my list. Hey, now my new objects are there, right? Okay, so that's all well and good, but let me show you how this impacts you moving forward. So let's say, oops, didn't mean to delete that. And let's catch up. There we go. So I got my new activity button, and we're going to align it with choose array. I don't need that much of a margin. And let's say activity. Okay. Let's define that real quick. New activity. New activity equals fine. Then I need to set my button with an on-click listener. Click. Okay. Equals. Oops. and go to activity 2, new intent, and I'm going to go from this to another activity.class, which is what I'm going to name my next class. And then I want to start activity, go to activity 2. Okay, so that's an intent call just to go to the next activity, which you should have done already by the time you're probably watching this, but if not, you'll get into it. But this is where if you had to pass that values, the strings from this activity to the next activity to the next activity, you would be adding that data here in the intent, which gets tedious because you have to add it with a key and a value pairing, and then you have to then get it on the next one. None of that comes into play when you're working with the list items class, separating it out into its own. So let's go ahead and create my new class, another activity. Right, okay. And activity. I think that's what I did here. Yeah. So then I need my on create. There we go. And needs to be in my manifest. Okay. So I'm just going to copy that real quick to the main 2. And just because I want you to visually see this, I'm just really quick duplicating all of this stuff out. Activity main 2, and we'll leave the spinner. But so you'll see that it's in a new activity. Get rid of this. Top, bottom, up, spinner. Next is a second class in the activity. Real simple. Okay, so that will open up. Oops. I forgot because it's in my click listener. It's thinking this was my listener. I needed to know it's from the main activity. So I have that all built. So what I can do is essentially, since I have the same logic, I'm just going to, or some of the same stuff, just real quick, copy a lot of this over. Since I'm using much of the same view, but I do not have those, and I don't need my new value. So I have my widget, I have my adapter, and then I just need this. Actually, I need the whole thing. I'll just dump that in there again, and then I'm going to call that class. Okay. So now what it's going to do is when I go to the new activity, it's only going to ever get the first list because that's what I'm telling it to do. Okay. So let's run it and put it here. Oh, I failed. What did I fail? Oops. Missed closing bracket. Try it again. So ultimately, in doing it this way, I saved myself several lines of code with the intent call because I didn't have to pass any data from one activity to the next. It's just there. So we'll see I still have my objects, switch my list. So I switched it, and now if I go to new activity, it gives me a new activity, second class, and I have my objects. So I used the same set of items in two activities, and I just called for it. I didn't have to pass any data. I didn't have to code it in any way other than to just put it off on its own in its own class up here, list items. So it's a really simple way to use the same set of data and access it from multiple areas without having to get into databasing and that sort of thing. It's really simple when you're looking for a small set of data that you just want to have accessed across the board. You can do a lot of things with this. You can add, like you saw, I had getters. You can customize it. Say you have a larger set of data, but you want to limit it. You want to, only do returns of certain things. I have a couple just tutorial walkthroughs on Medium and in my GitHub of just demos of stuff like this, of taking a set of data and stripping it down to a subset of that data and then returning that value. If that's something that you're interested in, I would love to walk through it with you. Otherwise, I hope this kind of helped give you a feel for just how you can arrange your data in a different way so that you can access it across multiple activities. Again, hope this helped. Hope to talk to you soon.